In the heart of Berlin, tourists wandered between cafes and street musicians, while an elderly Muslim man recited gentle Quranic verses, holding the book with reverence. Suddenly, a woman burst forward in fury. "Stop that! This isn't a mosque!" She pushed him. The man fell and the Quran hit the stone ground with a dry thud. Cameras shot up. The entire square held its breath. Then, in front of dozens of witnesses, a sudden gust twisted out of nowhere, lifted the Quran from the ground as if by invisible hands, and placed it back at the height of the old man's trembling hands. No one understood. No one could explain it. Stay with me, because the full video showed something that made the whole world say, "Allah defended his servant." Before continuing, check if you're already subscribed and tell in the comments which city you're watching from. The elderly man's name was Abdelkader El Hassan, 78 years old, born in Tangier, Morocco. He had lived nearly 30 years in Berlin, working as a school custodian until retirement. He had no family nearby, but carried a serenity that made anyone lower their voice when approaching him. His routine was simple. He woke up before Fajr, recited a few pages of the Qur'an, made mint tea, and slowly walked to Hermannplatz Square, where he always sat on the same bench. There, between the noise of trams and the laughter of tourists, he recited verses to keep his heart steady and his mind at peace. Many locals knew him. Some left coins, others just nodded respectfully. There were also those who filmed his recitation, impressed by his calm, steady voice. But Abdelkader chose that square for another reason. Where there are people moving, there are hearts that need to hear something from Allah, he always said. That day, however, the small crowd that usually watched him in silence would witness something none of them would ever forget. The afternoon in Hermannplatz unfolded like any other. Musicians played violin near the station, bicycles weaved through the flow of pedestrians, tourists snapped photos of the flower stalls. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts, and the low sun cast long shadows across the walkway. Abdelkader sat on his usual bench, leaned his cane at his side, and opened the Quran with the care of someone holding something precious. The recitation began softly, almost a whisper, yet clear enough to envelop the space around him. Some passers-by slowed their steps, drawn by the Arabic melody that contrasted with the chaos of the square. That was when she appeared, a woman around 40, quick steps, tense expression, headphones resting on her neck. She crossed the square, complaining loudly on the phone, irritated with everything. Traffic, noise, someone being late. When she passed by the old man, she heard the recitation. She stopped, turned her face slowly. Her eyes carried exhaustion and impatience. "Seriously? Here, in the middle of the way?" she muttered, loud enough for some to hear. A cyclist parking nearby shot her a disapproving look. A group of young tourists stopped recording their video and pointed the camera at her instead. The tension began like a thin thread in the air, almost unnoticeable. Unaware of her irritation, Abdelkader continued reciting, his tone steady, his breathing even. The Quran reflected the light, as if each verse illuminated the page. The woman took 2 steps forward, now clearly displeased. "Can you stop that? You're bothering people. Some of us are trying to live our lives." The murmur of the square changed. A musician put down his bow. An ice cream vendor lifted his head. A tourist's phone began recording without him even noticing. Abdelkader raised his eyes slowly, with the calm of someone who has lived many lives in one. He answered in a low voice, "My daughter, this recitation harms no one." But the sentence only enraged her further. Her breathing quickened, her shoulders rose, her face flushed. "I don't want to hear that. This is Germany, not your country." Some people frowned. Others began recording discreetly. The atmosphere shifted. The air, once alive with music and chatter, grew heavy, thick with expectation. The wind slowed. The flags hanging from the poles froze for a moment, as if even the square waited for the next move. Abdelkader closed his eyes for a moment, resuming the verses. The woman, in a blind impulse, took a decisive step in his direction. The line between irritated and aggressive was about to be crossed. The woman moved forward without hesitation and stopped in front of Abdelkader, blocking his light. Her face was tense, her breathing short, as if she carried burdens the old man would never know. "I told you to shut your voice," she snapped. Her hand pointed at the book. A few steps behind, a child grabbed her mother's arm, frightened. The violinist quietly lowered his bow. The hum of the square faded, as if everyone had pressed the same invisible button. Abdelkader lifted his gaze, soft like still water, and marked the verse on the page with his finger. His voice came out almost like a sigh. "I don't wish to disturb anyone, daughter. I only recite to keep the heart awake." She just laughed, a short, bitter laugh. "Awake? You're causing chaos. If you want to pray, do it far from other people." He tilted his head, his posture unchanged. "The remembrance of Allah can be made on any land." The answer made the woman lose control. With a sudden gesture, she shoved the old man's fragile shoulder. The impact was enough to throw off his balance. The Qur'an slipped from his hands, spun in the air and fell open, its pages touching the cold granite of the square. A sharp sound echoed. Some pedestrians gasped, others covered their mouths. Several phones were raised at once. Recordings began from different angles, each lens capturing the same painful moment: a sacred book on the ground, and an elderly man trying to steady himself on his cane. Abdelkader took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the fallen Qur'an. A murmur escaped his lips, barely audible. "Hasbi Allahu." The woman stepped back, perhaps surprised by her own violence, but the square did not give her time to reflect, because at that moment a strange wind swept through the space. It wasn't normal breeze. It didn't come from the side. It didn't follow any direction. It was as if it had appeared from the center of the square, pushing the air outward. The leaves on the trees trembled without reason. Loose papers lifted off the ground. Tourists began looking around, uneasy, and the Qur'an, still open on the ground, moved imperceptibly. A small fold at the corner of a page lifted as if invisible fingers touched it. The entire square held its breath. Something was about to happen. The movement of the book became more obvious when the wind gained strength, but in a way impossible to explain. It wasn't a current coming from the street, nor a gust from the trees. It was as if the air had a center, and that center was exactly where the Qur'an lay. The fallen linden leaves began swirling around the book, forming a small vortex. Curiously, none of them touched the feet of the people nearby. A tourist touched his own face, confused. "I don't feel anything, and no wind." Others tried the same. Still faces, untouched hair, clothes without the slightest movement. But on the ground, right in front of everyone, the scene defied all logic. The Qur'an opened a bit more, turning 2 pages as if someone were leafing through it gently. The paper didn't crumple, didn't vibrate harshly. It simply moved softly, as if obeying an invisible hand. The woman who had pushed the old man stepped back, her eyes wide. Her fingers began to tremble. This is not possible." The entire square sank into a silence that seemed to have weight. The violinist held his instrument against his chest. Cyclists stopped mid-pedal. Even the birds, moments ago chattering in the branches, suddenly fell silent as if paying attention. Cell phone cameras began recording almost simultaneously. Clicks, lights blinking, screens rising above heads. "Record that," whispered a young man in German. "It's moving by itself," murmured an elderly Turkish woman. The old man, standing with the help of his cane, watched everything with a serene expression, without surprise. It was as if he understood every detail of that moment. The wind around the book intensified, forming such a precise circle that even the suspended dust seemed to dance in orbit. But one detail stunned the onlookers. Not a single leaf touched the Qur'an. It was as if the air protected it, not just moved it. The woman, increasingly frightened, pressed her hand against her chest. Her face had gone pale. A few steps ahead, a man approached and tried to touch the vortex. His hand passed through the air, but he recoiled immediately, feeling a strange resistance. Not pain, but something like pushing against very dense water. "There's something here," he said, bewildered. The whole square began to understand this wasn't coincidence. It was a moment none of them would be able to explain easily, and one that would change the course of the story taking shape there. And the book, still resting at the center of that invisible force, was preparing for an even more astonishing gesture. When the video began circulating, the internet plunged into debates, but one in particular drew attention. A physics student at Humboldt University named Malik decided to analyze everything frame by frame. Locked in the lab, he enlarged the image, adjusted contrast, measured the intensity of the leaves' movement. The cursor slid slowly across the screen as he noted calculations. If this were ordinary wind, people would have felt it. Their clothes would have moved. The pattern would be irregular, he murmured. He repeated the scene dozens of times. The Qur'an didn't just move, it aligned itself as if guided by a force with intent. Malik paused at the exact moment when the book began to rise. There was no hand, shadow, object or string, no external element. This violates normal air dynamics. It makes no aerodynamic sense. The discovery unsettled him. That same day, other cameras around the square were reviewed. One of them, mounted high on a pole, revealed an even more mysterious detail. The vortex spinning around the Qur'an didn't blow the dust away. Instead, the dust seemed to move outward and return, as if an invisible bellows were breathing around the book. The experts consulted by the Berlin City Council reached no conclusion. A meteorologist, after watching the recordings, shook his head. There's no physical explanation. Wind requires flow, direction, pressure, but here there is no source. Nothing pushes the air. It comes from nowhere. A German engineer analyzed the vibration of the tree leaves. Look, the upper branches are completely still. If there were wind, they would be the first to move. It's impossible. While science stumbled over insufficient hypotheses, emotion grew among those who had witnessed the scene. The video didn't show just a floating book. It showed a boundary, the boundary between the visible and the invisible. Those who witnessed it swore the air had shape. Others said they felt a different, heavy kind of silence. Some claimed to recognize that moment as a sign. Meanwhile, the Moroccan elder, back in his small apartment in Neukölln, did not seek attention. He sat by the window, adjusted his traditional cap, and opened the Qur'an once again, the same one that had touched the ground. With hands trembling from age, he lifted his gaze to Berlin's sky, covered with grey clouds, and recited softly, "My Lord, you are the protector of every weakness. Give strength to the heart that bows to you." He did not ask for justice. He did not ask for a sign. He only asked that Allah remain near. And at that moment, a very gentle gust tapped against the window pane like a silent reply. But the world had not yet seen the most striking part of this story. The true turning point was about to happen, in front of a crowd that would never forget what they saw. The story gained a new dimension when the Berlin police confirmed the aggressor's identity. Her name, partially disclosed because of the ongoing legal process, appeared in every newspaper. Public pressure increased and new footage emerged, this time recorded by a nearby cafe's security camera. The additional video brought an undeniable revelation. The wind began exactly 1 second after the shove. Not before, not after. The timing was perfect, almost surgical. The scene showed the old man trying to regain balance after being pushed backward, the Qur'an falling open on the pavement, and then, as if obeying an invisible command, the first dry leaf spinning at his feet. Right afterward, the vortex formed, small focused, only around the sacred book. International news outlets highlighted this detail. The specialists attempting a technical explanation ran out of arguments. There was no airflow coming from cars, the underground subway, the urban ventilation system, or any weather variation. Everything remained static, except the precise point where the Qur'an rested. Meanwhile, the Muslim community of Berlin sought to understand what the elder had been reciting at the moment of the shove. Witnesses remembered his voice, gentle, aged, pronouncing verses known for bringing serenity and refuge. A respected imam from Neukölln's central mosque was invited to analyze the footage with amplified audio. After listening carefully, he confirmed what he was reciting was part of Surah Yasin, a verse about the protection granted to those who turn to Allah. The imam's words quickly spread among Muslims and non-Muslims. It is no coincidence that protection came at the exact moment the attack occurred, and that statement ignited public outrage. Within days, the case was no longer just an impressive video. It had become a symbol of something greater, violence against a devout elder who responded with peace, and an episode many recognized as divine intervention. Silent protests appeared in the square. Young people left flowers at the site with notes written in German, Arabic, Turkish, and French. Respect. Faith cannot be knocked down. Allah honors those who honor him. The woman who had pushed the elder began facing public rejection. On social media, thousands demanded accountability. Meanwhile, the old man stayed far from the commotion. He sought neither revenge nor fame. He simply continued his routine, walked to the square, recited calmly, and returned home. But the truth had already surfaced, and the eyes that once ignored his presence now turned toward him with respect and admiration. The world had seen too much to turn back, and the next event would be even more transformative, not only for the city, but for the very woman who had pushed him. The backlash from the video became unbearable for the aggressor. Messages of condemnation, harsh criticism at work, neighbors avoiding her. Everything surrounded her like a shadow she had created herself. For days she tried to hide behind weak excuses. I was stressed. I didn't mean to hurt him and he annoyed me. But no excuse could bury the truth that haunted her. Until one cold morning, she made the decision she had been avoiding. She put on a long coat, took a deep breath and walked to Alexanderplatz, the very place where everything had happened. With each step, she felt the weight of remorse. When she arrived, she saw the elder sitting on the same bench, the Qur'an open before him, reciting with his usual serenity. A light breeze moved his white beard, as his voice filled the space with a peace that violently contrasted with the storm inside her. For a moment she considered turning around and leaving, but something stronger pulled her forward. "Sir," her voice faltered. He lifted his gaze, gentle. "Yes, my daughter." She swallowed hard. The words stuck in her throat. I am that woman." Not a single muscle in his face tensed. No trace of anger appeared. He simply closed the Qur'an slowly and asked, "How is your heart today?" The question shattered her completely. She raised her hand to her face, trying to hold back the growing tears. "I don't know. Ever since that day I haven't been able to sleep. I see that wind. I see the book rising. I did something horrible. I hurt you." The elderly man extended his wrinkled hand and placed it gently on her arm, a gesture so soft it seemed impossible coming from someone who had been pushed to the ground. "The wound that heals is the one on the body. What you feel now is the wound of the soul, and that one only heals when you seek forgiveness." She looked toward the spot where the Qur'an had fallen days earlier. At that exact point, it seemed the wind moved differently, as if the memory were etched into the square itself. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she murmured. The old man smiled, gentle, sincere. "My daughter, I forgave you the moment I stood up. Don't carry a weight that Allah already saw fall from your hands." The tears finally fell. The entire square fell silent. People walked slowly, sensing the intensity of the moment. Now her dilemma stood before her. Accept this forgiveness and begin a real change, or continue running, trying to hide a mistake the whole world had already seen. She took a deep breath. "If you forgave me, then I want to ask Allah for forgiveness too." He nodded. "Whoever seeks sincerely will find. Begin with repentance. The rest, Allah softens." The wind blew stronger than it had minutes before, lifting the leaves around them. It felt like a subtle sign, as if the sky were witnessing the scene. And so, on that simple bench, a broken woman and a devout elder found something no viral video could ever explain: the chance to turn a fall into redemption. The next morning, the square felt different. Tourists, locals, curious onlookers, students, all arrived early, as if something were drawing them there. The video of the gust that lifted the Qur'an had already crossed borders, and now dozens waited to see the old man recite again. Abdelkader walked slowly to his usual bench. People opened space without him needing to ask. Some removed their shoes as a sign of respect. Others simply folded their hands over their chests. The woman who had pushed him stayed behind, discreet, but with her eyes fixed on him. The elder opened the Qur'an with trembling fingers, not from age, but from the quiet power of the moment. He inhaled deeply, smiled at Berlin's grey sky, and began reciting the same verse as the day before, the one about protection and dignity. His voice echoed through the square as if amplified. It wasn't volume, it was presence. And then, at the exact moment he pronounced the same word that preceded the previous miracle, the wind rose, but not like a chaotic gust. It was a circular, gentle breeze that swirled only around him and the book, exactly as before. Dry leaves rose in a spiral, but no one felt air on their face. There was no chill, no movement of wind anywhere except for that subtle, impossibly precise circle. The crowd stopped breathing. A man covered his mouth with his hand. A young woman dropped her phone without noticing. A child whispered, "Mama, look." The woman who had pushed him fell to her knees, overwhelmed by something no camera could ever translate. The sound of the world dimmed. Even the trams passing on the street lost their usual noise, as if someone had turned down the city's volume. And when Abdelkader finished the verse, the wind stopped instantly, as if obeying an invisible command. No one moved for a few seconds. It was as if the entire square was suspended between the ground and the sky, held in a moment that would never occur the same way again. The elder closed the Qur'an, looked at the people around him, and said in a firm yet gentle voice, "The word of Allah does not fall to the ground. He lifts it as many times as necessary." That sentence fell over the crowd like light. The entire square remained in absolute silence. And in that moment, everyone, believers, curious onlookers, skeptics, understood they had just witnessed something far beyond the laws of everyday life. The sign was complete. The hours that followed turned Hermannplatz into an international headline. Newspapers in Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and even Scandinavia reproduced the video recorded by multiple witnesses. The titles varied, but all carried the same tone. The sacred book lifted by the wind. Miracle or coincidence? Debate grows in Europe. Islamophobia in Berlin reignites discussion on religious respect. Television studios invited experts in air physics, meteorologists, and even fluid dynamics scientists. None of them reached a convincing conclusion. The isolated movement of the Qur'an, the spinning leaves confined to that small circle, the absence of wind in the rest of the square, everything seemed to contradict any technical explanation. Meanwhile, the woman who had pushed the elder, identified as Anja Weiss, decided to speak publicly. She held an improvised press statement right in front of the square. Visibly shaken, her voice trembling, she declared, "I was wrong. I acted out of ignorance and prejudice. I ask forgiveness from Mr. Abdelkader and from everyone who felt offended. I don't want to carry this weight in my heart." It was the first time she had spoken since the incident. Many criticized her. Others applauded her late courage, but no one denied the symbolic power of her apology. Abdelkader, after watching the recording of her statement, simply smiled with compassion. "Forgiveness is lighter than anger. If Allah forgives, who am I not to?" He quickly became an involuntary symbol of serenity. Interviews were offered, invitations to debates, public appearances. He declined all of them. He preferred to return to his quiet routine, the birds that perched near him, the hot tea on cold mornings, the discreet recitations that never sought an audience. What changed was not his life, but the way Germany looked at men like him. Schools began discussing Islamophobia in classrooms. Community groups organized dialogue circles between Christians, Jews, Muslims, and atheists. City council members debated protection policies against crimes motivated by religious intolerance. For the first time in a long while, thousands of people reflected on something simple: the right of someone to recite a sacred verse without being shoved, humiliated, or silenced. And it all began with an old Moroccan man who never raised his voice, but watched his book be lifted by the wind. As the months passed, Hermannplatz stopped being just a place people hurried through. The community, moved by the incident, began transforming the space without anyone knowing exactly when it truly began. It was a slow, almost organic change, born from a collective desire to repair an injustice and at the same time preserve the serenity everyone saw in that elderly Moroccan man. The city council, moved by international repercussion, inaugurated a small circular gathering area, a semicircle of wooden benches, a few native plants and a discreet plaque, dialogue and listening zone. It wasn't a religious monument. It was simply a reminder that the square now carried a story that taught respect. There, throughout the day, groups gathered to talk, read, study, or simply observe the movement around them. At the center of this new environment sat Abdelkader el-Hassan, not as an official leader, but as a constant presence. He sat on his usual bench with the Qur'an open on his lap, reciting softly, in a voice that seemed to calm even the pigeons that approached without fear. Children began seeking him out on their own. They returned from school carrying big backpacks and asked with innocent curiosity, "Uncle, can you read yesterday's verse again?" He smiled, adjusted his Moroccan cap, and fulfilled every request with affection. He explained the meaning of the words, told stories from his youth in Tangier, spoke about patience, uprightness, and kindness. He never adopted an authoritative tone. He was always a loving grandfather, guiding little ones to reflect. This scene began to attract university students curious about the old man from the viral video. They sat near him to listen to Quranic passages and ask about spirituality, coexistence, and wisdom. He answered simply, "The light of knowledge doesn't enter by force. It enters when it finds open doors." Tourists passing through Berlin often recognized the elder from the video. Some approached to thank him, others just wanted to hear him recite for a few minutes. Some cried, some grew emotional, some said, "Seeing your video changed how I think." He only bowed his head and said, "The change comes from Allah. I am only a voice." Even local shopkeepers, once always in a hurry, began protecting that space. If a group spoke too loudly, someone quickly said, "Shh, the gentleman is reading," and everyone respected it. On certain days, volunteers brought hot mint tea, sweetbreads, and fruit. They took turns keeping the area clean, sweeping leaves and picking up litter. There was a shared sense of responsibility, as if Hermannplatz had become a small urban beacon of peaceful coexistence. The woman involved in the incident, Anja Weiss, also began visiting the square. Without drawing attention, she sat farther away, watching the elder with a mix of guilt and gratitude. No one judged her. The community had learned that sincere remorse deserves space. One day, an elderly German woman approached Anja and said, "Here, we are all learning." Anja cried silently. She understood she was being welcomed, not excluded. The transformation wasn't only emotional, it had become cultural. Local schools began bringing students to speak with Abdelkader, listen to recitations and learn about respecting the beliefs of others. Teachers said the children left the visits calmer and more thoughtful. Once a month, interfaith groups gathered there. Jews, Christians and Muslims sat side by side, sharing texts, stories and prayers. The place that had once been a stage for intolerance now held bridges, not walls. In that new normal, Hermannplatz carried a different atmosphere. Less haste, more listening, less conflict, more understanding, less noise, more reverence. And at the center of it all was a gentle-voiced Moroccan elder, whose recitation had changed not just a moment, but an entire city. Berlin discovered that a single act of faith can transform an ordinary square into a sanctuary of humanity. The end of that afternoon in Berlin felt slower than usual. The sky, tinted orange and violet, reflected on the modern buildings surrounding Hermannplatz. The public lights flicked on one by one as movement quieted and the square settled into a soft, almost reverent silence. As he did every day, Abdelkader carefully closed the Qur'an after the final recitation. He ran his wrinkled hand over the green cover, breathing deeply, as someone who thanks for one more moment of granted peace. The light spring breeze brushed against his clothes, gently moving the fabric of his coat. He lifted his gaze and let the breeze touch his face, as if recognizing in it an old friend. The memory of the day he had been pushed returned every now and then, not with pain, but as a silent reminder. He remembered the impact, the Qur'an hitting the ground, people's shock, and then moments later that impossible movement, the book being lifted by the wind and returned to his hands. It marked him deeply, not because of the aggression, but because of the response. For Abdelkader, that gust hadn't been spectacle. It had been warning, affection, protection. It was Allah showing the world something his heart already knew. No one who recites his name is ever abandoned. He smiled as the long shadows of the square stretched before him. He saw children playing in the distance, tourists taking photos, couples walking slowly, young people sitting in circles talking. Everything seemed in harmony, as if the place had been purified since that day. A boy of about 9 ran up to him holding a small booklet. "Uncle Abdelkader, will you read to me tomorrow too?" He placed his hand on the child's head and replied, "If Allah wills, I will be here." When the boy walked away, a group of tourists passed nearby. A woman smiled and made a gesture of gratitude. "Your story touched us deeply. You are an inspiration." He shook his head, humble. "I am only a servant. The inspiration comes from Allah." The wind blew again, stronger this time, yet still gentle. It lifted dry leaves that swirled briefly in front of the elder before drifting onward, as if dancing to the rhythm of an invisible message. Then, in a nearly inaudible murmur, Abdelkader recited a verse he had repeated since youth. "Allah is with the patient." He stood up slowly, leaning on the bench. The square gradually slipped into night, but carried a light that did not depend on lamps. It was the light of an event that had changed not just one man's life, but the perception of an entire community. As he walked home with calm steps, he knew that place would never be the same, and that each recitation there would leave a trace of serenity for whoever passed after him. As the distant adhan echoed from a neighborhood mosque, Abdelkader smiled and thanked the Creator. "My Lord, may my voice, small and weak, continue to be an instrument of peace." The breeze blew once more, the final greeting of the day. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video, because divine protection needs no explanation. It simply reveals itself silently to those who remain steadfast.